Assalamu alaikum. Today I came to the Islamic school in Indonesia, and it's some kind of experiment. I want to speak with students and to know how they study here. My wife suggested this idea to me, inspired by something she had done 11 years ago. Back then, she organized a similar program that was even featured in local newspapers. This year, she invited me to join her and experience it firsthand. Today, we are visiting two schools in one day. The first is a private Islamic school where parents pay for their children's education, and the second is a public state school which offers free education to teenagers from various religious backgrounds. This will be fascinating as well. Compare two schools with very different approaches to education. We started at SMA Muhammadiyah No. 1 Purwokerto, a private high school established by the Muhammadiyah organization to provide quality education rooted in Islamic values. As one of the top private schools in Purwokerto, it focuses on both academic excellence and character development, emphasizing Islamic principles. Here, students learn the history of Islam, recite the Quran, study Arabic, and engage in Islamic jurisprudence for daily worship. In Indonesia, the education system includes both public and private schools, each serving different communities and purposes. At Muhammadiyah, I was warmly welcomed by the English teacher, who happened to be one of my wife's former teachers. In the schoolyard, the students greeted me with enthusiasm, shouting out questions even before we started. Their energy was overwhelming, and I'll admit, I felt a little embarrassed. It is not every day they see a foreigner, especially in a city like Purwokerto with a population of just 250,000 people. We moved to a classroom on the second floor, where everything was prepared for my presentation. The students sat at their desks, separated by gender, boys on one side, girls on the other. Interestingly, unlike in some other Muslim countries, boys and girls in Indonesia study in the same classroom, though they sit apart. This reflects the unique blend of cultural and religious influences in the country. My presentation covered the history, culture, and Islam in Russia. It's twice bigger than Indonesia, but actually the population of the whole Russia is smaller than the population of Java. To keep it engaging, I added lighter topics that might interest the students. So you could notice that I don't smile, right? Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry for that, because Russian people actually, when they see strangers, they don't smile. I'm staying in Indonesia and I'm learning how to smile to other people. Afterward, they asked me a wide range of questions, from politics, such as the Russian-Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestine conflict, to more personal and cultural curiosities.
As a Russian citizen, do you agree about your country's intervention about Israel-Palestine conflict?
So I know that Putin is a friend of Netanyahu, but of course I am a Muslim, I am pro-Palestine, okay?
Is corruption case in Russia was high?
Yes, of course, it's very high.
It's very high as Indonesia. Or no?
What I noticed in Indonesia, for example, Purwokerto is a small city, right? The population around 2,000 and 500,000 people. But here you have really good coffee shops, you have really good places to do activities, really good parks. In Russia, in the city with the same population, you will not have such good coffee shops, restaurants, cafes. And I think it is because of the corruption, because Russian people, they just don't have money. Only the government have a lot of money. What stood out to me was how open and straightforward the students were. This openness can be attributed to Indonesia's incredible diversity, home to numerous ethnic groups, cultures, and local languages. For centuries, Indonesians have embraced foreigners. Whether through trade or the arrival of religious preachers of Christianity and Islam, this long history of interaction has fostered a culture of acceptance, curiosity, and a natural ability to connect with people from different backgrounds. This experience was not just about sharing my culture, but also about understanding theirs. A beautiful exchange that left me with a deeper appreciation of Indonesia and its people. After the presentation, we all went outside to take a group photo. The sun was shining brightly that day and I couldn't stop squinting. I hope it didn't ruin the picture. I also admire the school's uniform. The uniform here is as bright as the sun. Schools in Indonesia have standard uniforms for elementary, middle and high school students. However, they often include a day dedicated to wearing batik. Today happened to be batik uniform day at schools in the Purwokerto area. In Russia, there are no strict rules about uniforms. Students there typically wear a white shirt with black trousers for boys and black skirts for girls. However, high school students in Russia often prefer casual clothing like t-shirts and jeans instead. Due to limited time, we had to say our goodbyes and head to the next school. On our way out, we passed by a large mosque located within the school grounds. This mosque is not only used by the students and teachers but also open to the public. The next school we visited is the oldest high school in Purwokerto, established even before Indonesia gained independence. The buildings at these schools still feature the old Dutch colonial-style architecture, with large, tall windows that gave the place a historic charm. The history of public high schools in Indonesia dates back to the Dutch colonial era, when schools were established primarily to educate the indigenous elite. Institutions provided advanced education, mainly to prepare students for administrative and governmental roles under colonial rule. After Indonesia gained independence in 1945, education became a national priority. The government began establishing public high schools nationwide to ensure accessible education for all citizens. These schools aimed to produce educated individuals who could contribute to nation building and take on professional roles in the newly independent country. Today, SMA Negeri schools are known for their academic excellence and are often highly competitive in their admission processes. At the second school, the hall was more spacious, and there were more students in attendance. I was formally introduced to the audience. From what I observed, the students weren't wearing a specific uniform, but they were all dressed in batik. That day, I wore a traditional Russian shirt, which added a nice element of cultural exchange. However, the microphone didn't work well, it was often too quiet, so I had to speak loudly, almost shouting, to ensure everyone could hear me. As a result, my throat started to hurt and my voice became hoarse.
So in summer it is quite the same as in Indonesia, the same weather.
Despite this, I was happy to deliver the lecture and hoped the students found it enjoyable. At the end of the session, the school presented me with a commemorative award. After the formalities, we headed to the school's central courtyard, where students recorded a short interview with me. In return, we decided to interview them, asking questions that might interest foreigners. For example, I asked why Indonesians rarely walk, even in the evenings when it's cooler. This is quite different from neighboring countries like Singapore and Malaysia, where walking is more common.
Kalau menurut saya, mungkin dari sekarang itu anak Gen Z itu tidak suka berolahraga dan lebih suka buat menaiki kendaraan bermotor karena itu lebih cepat dan juga tidak membuat banyak keringat.
Kalau dari saya sendiri mungkin alasan kenapa orang Indonesia itu malas untuk jalan kaki bisa saja dari gengsi, karena biasanya itu orang-orang pengen mempunyai kendaraan masing-masing gitu, jadi berlomba-lomba buat memiliki kendaraan gitu, biasanya dipamerkan juga seperti itu, dan hal itu tuh membuat rasa malasnya tuh muncul gitu loh. Jadi kayak aku nggak mau jalan kaki, mending naik mobil atau motor aja biar cepet, biasanya seperti itu.
I also asked the students about their views on Indonesia's colonial past.
Baik, kalau dari saya sendiri, saya sama sekali tidak ada merasa benci, karena itu sudah dari masa lalu, karena Indonesia juga sekarang tuh sudah banyak sekali mengadakan ekspor-impor dengan negara luar. walaupun negara luar tersebut sudah menjajah kita, tapi kita masih perlu barang-barang dari luar negeri tersebut. Maka kita tuh tidak bisa membenci, dan lagi pula itu pun juga dilakukan oleh nenek moyang kita atau mungkin dilakukan oleh orang lama. Maka kita harus memiliki sikap saling mengampuni seperti itu.
Kalau dari saya sendiri juga tidak ada ya untuk rasa benci karena itu kan memang sudah masa lalu gitu ya.
I was amazed how Indonesians don't seem to harbor resentment toward former colonizers. Despite the history of colonization, Indonesia remains warm and welcoming toward them. This attitude shows remarkable strength and maturity, as they recognize that the modern nations are far removed from their colonial era ancestors. Indonesians seem to embrace their past with a sense of pride, but without bitterness. Interestingly, Indonesians' openness and rich cultural heritage make it a potential key player in the global Islamic community. I hope to see Indonesia strengthen its political and economic ties with other Muslim nations, particularly Turkic countries like Turkey, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and others. After the event, we had some free time, and one of the teachers, Irsham, who was also a former teacher of my wife, kindly gave us a brief tour of the school. We began in the inner garden, which felt like a peaceful sanctuary, with lush greenery, a small pond, and a bridge. It was the perfect spot for students to relax. In the corridor near the garden, I noticed posters with information about HIV prevention and early pregnancy awareness. It felt quite progressive. However, with birth rates declining worldwide, it will be interesting to see how these initiatives shape future demographics. Then we went to the school mosque to pray. The mosque was very neat and clean. I'm not sure why, but in Indonesia there seems to be a fondness for the antique Greek style, and I often see buildings, columns, and statues designed in this way. The shelves in the mosque also had copies of the Quran, and anyone could take one to read. After visiting the mosque, we headed to the school's basketball court, where we saw many students still participating in club activities even though classes had ended. In Indonesian schools, students can join various clubs, ranging from sports, arts and science, to journalism. They also have OSIS, which stands for Student Organization within the school. OSIS is an organization where students can develop leadership skills, participate in school events, and contribute to school activities. In Russian schools, clubs are usually non-existent, or at best, exist only on papers. Typically in Russia, after classes, all students go home. I will be honest, if I could turn 20 years younger and choose, I would prefer to study in an Indonesian school rather than in a Russian one. School buildings in Russia tend to be very monotonous, with no courtyards or places to walk, and classrooms that often have very old renovations from the 60s. Since there are rarely any student activities, many Russian students struggle with depression from spending too much time in school. For example, this is what my school looked like in Russia, and even though it is considered a pricey institution, the conditions of cheaper public schools are even worse. In comparison, this Indonesian state school is far superior, at least in terms of architecture. The place reminded me of a setting from a teenage anime, which makes sense since many schools in Asian countries share similar features. Next, we visited the local library. I don't have much to say about it as it was a fairly typical library, but I did see an interesting book on science from an Islamic perspective, and another about traditional Indonesian ornaments. As a designer, I really appreciated it, even though its appearance was a bit shabby. I hope I can find something similar in a store. By now, it was getting dark, and it was time to leave this wonderful place. I have to mention once again that the garden here is incredible. It looked like paradise to me. I swear, if I had studied at a school like this, I would have probably grown up to be a much more cheerful person. In front of the main gates, there was a football field where the students were playing. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the whole city. I thoroughly enjoyed my visit to the Indonesian schools. It was an experience that felt quite unusual and unique. I realize I may not have shared as much as you would like have to know, but my trip was limited in time and I didn't get the chance to observe a full class. Anyway, if you liked the video, feel free to leave a comment and don't forget to follow my Instagram, where you can see more photos from my travels around Indonesia.